Chapter 15. Laura and May had never truly experienced happiness until now. One had her lover, while the other was devoted to music. George was overjoyed to see Laura so happy, and was lost in his own thoughts, contemplating his life's work, creating plans that would benefit humanity. Colonel Drake was thrilled to have earned a well-deserved rest, and was excited to reunite with his family and witness the progress of European men. As the gangway filled with people, memories of a similar occasion flooded Colonel Drake's mind. It was almost 2 o'clock, and visitors were no longer allowed on the ship, except for messengers delivering telegrams, mail, packages, and flowers for the travelers. The uniformed captain and junior officers stood on the bridge of the Campania, while the chief officer was at the bow and the second officer at the aft. The captain signaled that everything was ready, and the cables were released. The engineer started the baby engine, which opened the great throttle valves partially. The twin screws began to rotate, and the Campania, like a giant awakened from slumber, slowly moved into the Hudson River. Hundreds of people on both the pier and the ship waved their handkerchiefs, exchanging tearful goodbyes until the distance separated them. For the next 24 hours, George Thorn was hardly seen on deck. He spent most of his time with Carl Seaman, the engineer. Colonel Drake was delighted to escort the 2 young ladies who appreciated his company. Before the voyage ended, they explored every available part of the Campania. Laura was surprised to find such a cultured gentleman in an engineer. Seaman's oak-furnished office was surrounded by soft couches, easy chairs, works of art, and burnished indicators and dials. He received his orders from the captain or officer on the bridge by telegraph. "It's child's play," May said, "and as easy as touching the keys of a great organ." Seaman then led his friends into the engine room. "It's hard to imagine the tremendous force of the 2 swiftly turning screws or propellers exerted against the surging waters of the Atlantic," he said. "Our 30,000 horsepower engines are equivalent to 180,000 strong men pulling at the oars, or twice the number of men who fought at Gettysburg to preserve the American Union." "Wonderful!" exclaimed Colonel Drake. "Steam, guided by the officer on the bridge, steers our massive ship with the slightest effort." "Mr. Seaman, could you please tell us how the ship is lit?" George asked. "We have 50 miles of insulated wire in the Campania for the electric current generated by our 2 dynamos," Seaman replied. "We have 13 50-16 candle power lights, equivalent to a total of 22,000 candle power, absorbing 135 horsepower. We also use large electric reflectors and searchlights to pick up buoys on a dark night. All our machinery is duplicated." As the electric lights illuminated the broad, clean decks of hardwood at night, and the promenaders filled the space with joy, one could easily imagine strolling along Broadway. The staterooms, public rooms, and dining room were all perfectly appointed and accommodating. Spending a week on the Atlantic during the summer months, surrounded by a cosmopolitan group of people, was as delightful as a brief stay at the ocean side. The Campania made the passage from Sandy Hook Light to Queenstown in less than 5.5 days, with an average speed of 21.82 knots per hour. Colonel Drake received telegrams and letters from his family saying that they would meet him at Leamington, and that Alfonso would meet his father at Liverpool. Evander Drake wired his wife when his party was expected to arrive. When the SS Campania arrived in the Mersey off Alexandra Dock at 10 o'clock in the morning, the company's tender promptly delivered the passengers to the Liverpool landing stage. Laura was the first to single out Alfonso, whose handkerchief waved a brother's welcome to the old world. Alfonso was the first to cross the gangway to the tender and rushed to his friends. The greeting was mutually cordial. The father embraced his boy, for he loved him much and still cherished a secret hope that his only son might yet turn his mind to business. Alfonso seemed especially pleased that George and his sister May had come, for he had frequently met May Thorn, and her singing had often charmed him. May was about his own age. As Alfonso helped her down the gangway to the deck, he thought he had never seen her look so pretty. She was about the size of his sister, Kimberly, slender, erect, and in her movements she was as graceful as the swaying willows. May's face was oval like that of her English mother. She had an abundance of brown hair, her eyes were brilliant, and her complexion, bronzed by the sea breezes, had a pink undercolouring that increased her beauty. If Alfonso's eyes were fixed on her a moment longer than custom allows, Perhaps he was excusable, for portrait painting was his hobby, and he fancied that he knew a beautiful face. Alfonso was all attention to his friends in clearing the baggage through customs and getting checks for Leamington. After lunch at the fine railway hotel, the 2 o'clock express from Lime Street Station was taken, and Colonel Drake and party became loud in their praises of John Bull's Island as they sped on, via Coventry with her 3 tall spires, to the fashionable Spa, where the Drake family were to be reunited once again. It was 6 o'clock when Alfonso alighted on the platform. "Here they are, Mother. I have brought them all. Father, Laura, George, and May." The Leamington meeting was a happy one. The sorrow of separation is often compensated by the joys of reunion. Mrs. Drake embraced her husband as if he had returned a hero from the wars. From a conflict that brought neither peace nor honor to capital or labor, he emerged. Kimberly, who was haughty and rarely responsive, assumed another character and warmly welcomed her sister Laura and Laura's intended husband as Brother George. Marcellus, too, was glad to make new acquaintances. 8 joyous people attracted the attention of many at the station. Fortunately, the next day was Sunday, which gave time for rest, for review of the past few exciting weeks, and for the development of future plans of travel. Much was told of the Drake trip through Ireland and of the last week spent in the south of England. Kimberly described to Laura and May Stonehenge, hanging stones, the wonder of Salisbury Plain, where stand the ruins of the Druid Temple, 3 circles of upright moss-grown stones with flat slabs across their tops, in which it is supposed the sun was worshipped with human sacrifices. Many burial mounds are scattered about. A broad driveway, a mile in extent, surrounds the temple, where possibly great processions came to witness the gorgeous displays. In early Britain, the Druid priests held absolute sway over the destinies of souls. These priests were finally overpowered by the Romans, and some of them burned upon their own altars. But Kimberly, you wrote that you planned to visit Osborne House. Yes, dear, we did go to the Isle of Wight, and saw Osborne House, Queen Victoria's home by the sea, as Balmoral is her summer home among the mountains of Scotland. Her Majesty's palace is surrounded by terraced gardens, nearly 5,000 acres of forests, pastures, and fertile meadows. Osborne House is furnished with much magnificence, mosaic flooring, costly marbles, statuary, paintings, books, and art souvenirs. There the Queen and Prince Albert painted, sang, and read together. Those were happy days indeed for the young rulers of a kingdom. Each of their children had a garden. The Prince of Wales worked in a carpenter's shop, and the royal princesses learned housework in a kitchen and dairy prepared for them. This was a revelation to Kimberly, who had been reared with little or nothing to do. Kimberly told Laura and May that she had just been reading The Early Life of the Queen, who said, "If one's home is happy, then trials and vexations are comparatively nothing." The Queen also said, "Children should be brought up simply and learn to put the greatest confidence in their parents." Kimberly continued, "The Queen often visited her people, bringing toys for the children, a promise to a child she never forgets, and gifts of warm clothing for the aged, to their great delight." At a conference of the Drake family, it was decided to go to London after spending Monday in a carriage drive to Warwick and Kenilworth Castles and Stratford-on-Avon. So Monday, promptly at 8 o'clock, 2 carriages stood waiting at the hotel. Colonel Drake took Mrs. Drake, May Thorn, and Alfonso with him, and George Thorn took Laura, Kimberly, and Marcellus in the second carriage. There are few, if any, more magnificent drives in England than the one through the beautiful Stratford district. 2 Englishmen once bet on the best walk in England. One chose the walk from Coventry to Stratford, while the other chose the walk from Stratford to Coventry. It was a beautiful day, and they were both so taken with the stunning countryside that they forgot all about their work. They drove 2 miles from Leamington, following the historic Avon River, until they reached Warwick Castle. Sir Walter Scott called it the fairest monument of ancient and chivalrous splendour, uninjured by the tooth of time. It is said that Warwick Castle was never taken by any enemy in the past. The visitors drove over the drawbridge, through a gateway covered in ivy and still guarded by an ancient portcullis. In the oak-panelled hall of the castle there are many historic relics and art treasures, including the helmet of Cromwell and the armour of the Black Prince. The drawing-room is finished in cedar. In the past, guests were summoned to the great banqueting hall by a blast of trumpets. The gardens contain the celebrated white marble Warwick vase from Adrian's villa, with interwoven vines forming the handles, and leaves and grapes adorning the margin of the vase. Superb views can be had from the castle towers. In the old town of Warwick, in the Beauchamp Chapel, lies the remains of Dudley, Earl of Leicester, one of Queen Elizabeth's favourites. She gave Leicester the beautiful Kenilworth Castle, which is 5 miles away. As the carriages drove over the smooth road, beneath the venerable elms and sycamores, artists along the way were sketching. Both Alfonso and Marcellus tipped their hats as members of a guild that recognizes art for art's sake, a society that takes cognizance of neither nationality nor sect. Laura and George had read Scott's novel, which tells of the ancient glories of Kenilworth, dating back to the 12th century, and today considered the most beautiful ruin in the world. Ivy covers the lofty ruined walls, the sun tinges the grey old towers in silver, and sends a flood of golden light through the deep windows of the once magnificent banqueting hall. For years, Kenilworth Castle was a royal residence, and later it was the scene of bloody conflicts between kings and nobles. Today, sheep peacefully graze within the ruins and about the grounds. Visitors from all parts of the world look in wonder upon the decay of glories that once dazzled all Europe. Here the Earl of Leicester entertained his virgin queen, hoping to marry her. As Elizabeth crossed the drawbridge, a song in her praise was sung by a lady of the lake on an island floating in the moat. Story writers have never tired of telling of the magnificence of these entertainments that cost the ambitious Earl $20,000 per day for 19 days. On their return, the party reached the Warwick Arms Hotel for lunch, after which they drove 8 miles to Stratford-on-Avon, a model town on the classic Avon. In Henley Street, in a half-timbered house recently carefully restored, Shakespeare was born. The walls and windows are covered in the names of visitors, while inside albums are kept for the autographs of kings, queens, Scott, Byron, Irving, and others. One of the 3 rooms below is an ancient kitchen, where the poet often sat by the big open chimney. Climbing a winding wooden stairway, George and Laura in the lead, our Drakeville friends entered the old-fashioned chamber, where, it is said, on St. George's Day, April 19th, 1564, William Shakespeare was born. A bust of the poet stands on the table. "We know little of his mother," said Laura, "except that she had a beautiful name, Mary Arden. If it is true as a rule that all great men have had great mothers, Mary Arden must have been a very superior woman." "The reverse, Laura, must be equally true," said George, "that all great women must have had great fathers." Laura, who had made a special study of Shakespeare and his works, did most of the talking. She said, "All that is definitely known of the life of the great poet can be put on half a page. It is thought that William was the son of a well-to-do farmer who lost his property. William, not above work, assisted his father as a butcher, then taught school, and later served as a lawyer's clerk. When he was 18, like most young people, he fell in love." Saying this, Laura led to the street, and the party drove to Shottery, a pretty village a mile away, where Anne Hathaway's thatched cottage is located. "Here the beardless William often came," said Laura, "and told his love to the English maiden. Anne Hathaway was older than William. She was 26, but they were married and had 3 children. When Shakespeare was 25, he was part owner of the Blackfriars Theatre in London. There he spent his literary life, and there he was an actor, dramatist, and manager. He became rich and returned occasionally to Stratford, where he bought lands and built houses. If we can trust statues and paintings and writers, William Shakespeare had a kingly physique, light hazel eyes, and auburn hair." "What about his death?" inquired Colonel Drake. "Of his death," said Laura, "we know little, save that the vicar of Stratford wrote that Shakespeare, Drayton, and Ben Jonson had a merry meeting, possibly drank too much, and that Shakespeare died of a fever then contracted on the anniversary of his birth, when he was 52 years old." "And where was he buried?" inquired Kimberly. "In the Stratford church," answered Laura, and the carriages were driven up an avenue of arching lime trees. The old church, with its tall and graceful spire, reflected in the waters of the Avon, is a restful place for the body that contains the mightiest voice in literature. Nearby also lie buried his wife and their children. A plain slab in the floor covers his remains. Recently, a new grave was dug near Shakespeare's, and the intervening wall fell in. A workman ventured to hold a lighted taper in Death's chamber, which revealed that the ashes of the immortal Shakespeare could be held in the palm of the hand. The Drake party drove back to Leamington to spend the night.